Usually my preferred horror film about Valentine's Day involves a certain minor from 1981. But with the recently released Thanksgiving paying homage to 2000 slashers, I found myself looking back on them with rose-tinted glasses. Whether it's House of Wax or Rob Zombie's Halloween, there's a schlockiness to them that didn't seem apparent upon release. But in retrospect, there's a certain quality that the 2000s have that I look back on with a bit of fondness. Oh, and since the Super Bowl was this Sunday,
greatest team in the history of professional football, 49ers!
Heh. So let's round up our cast of recognizable actors, add in a killer motif, and find a scary mask. Because today on Real Slashers, we're getting into 2001's Valentine.
You both received threatening notes signed JM, and after I tell you I'm looking for Jason Marquette, you don't think to mention it?
I thought it was a joke.
I'm Tyler Nichols with JoBlo Horror, and I love me some slashers. Whether they're good, bad, tame, violent, not so much, stupid, smart, anything in between, I'm down for them. And Valentine is the perfect mix of all of the above. There's a little bit of I Know What You Did Last Summer happening, with mysterious gifts showing up for all these girls who turned down a boy in middle school? Oh, I hope to God these aren't high schoolers. See, Valentine follows the pretty basic premise of a boy being bullied in school and then taking revenge on the girls who rejected him 12 years later. But what makes it stand out is the cast. Each of these women makes the most of their scenes, and we get some distinct characters that will surprise you. First, there's Katherine Heigl's Shelley Fisher. They lean into the V-Day theme hard with her being on a first date. It's hard to sympathize with this girl right off the bat. I understand what they're trying to do with her being on a date with this douchebag, but her rolling her eyes as it becomes apparent that she'll have to pay her fair share, I mean, come on. He even states how she got all of these expensive items, so the fact that she seems almost annoyed that he's not going to pay for it makes her instantly unlikable. But they don't lean into it hard enough to have a satisfying payoff. If you know you're gonna kill her off shortly after, then just lean into it more, come on.
Right.
I get that this was a different era, but she just comes across like a petulant baby. As soon as I realized that she was the opening kill, I got much more on board for the film. God, can you imagine this being the final girl?
That's nice. That's really nice.
Next up is Jessica Cofield's Lily Voigt. I always found it ironic that she's in this film because I've always confused her with Marley Shelton, one of the other actresses. Unfortunately, she's probably the most forgettable of the friends, but she does have her moments. She hooks up in an art installation and quickly meets her demise. While it's a very cool visual, her death leaves a lot to be desired, which is a running theme here. Before I saw this film, I always thought that Denise Richards was the lead. And can you blame me? She gets top billing and gets prime placement on the poster. And she's around for a lot of the movie. On the surface, her character of Paige Prescott would be categorized as the slutty friend of the group.
Jesus, Paige, it's a funeral.
What?
Where things get interesting, though, is that she proves to be much smarter and less of a hoe than initially thought. She pours wax on this douchebag's penis and turns down the advances of this detective. It's a nice subversion from the usual, even if her personality is still a bit of a, hoe. Jessica Capshaw's Dorothy Wheeler is one of the most interesting girls in the film as she has a unique past. See, when we're given a look at the middle school dance that pissed off the killer, we also get a look at the girls, including one that they described as big boned. This is what they're referring to. A perfectly normal looking girl. God, no wonder eating disorders were such a thing in this era. I mean, what the hell? She's complex, and if anything, she should have been the person who the film was centered around. It would have made the ending even more interesting, but we'll get to that in a bit. Marley Shelton's Kate Davies is our lead, and I've always enjoyed Shelton, so it was nice to see her in a prominent role. Though the strange thing about the narrative is that it's not exactly clear that she's the lead, at least not in the same way that a Sidney Prescott or Julie James was. No, the story's completely revolved around those characters. And here, outside of the ending, Kate's given nearly the same amount of time as the other girls. Though I'd say that what makes the film a little more interesting is that it takes a little less obvious approach in that regard. But as a final girl, she's pretty dumb, unable to notice all the signs that make the killer's identity fairly obvious. Because as much as they lean into the mystery element, anyone who's paying any modicum of attention will figure it out right away, which is another reason why I feel like Dorothy Wheeler would have made for a more interesting final girl. These girls get picked off one by one as we get closer and closer to finding out who the true killer is. And if you're paying any attention, you'll catch on quickly.
Dance with me, Kate.
No, Adam, I just want to find Dorothy.
I'm asking you nicely. Dance with me. Don't make me beg, Kate.
Despite knowing that the film is a revenge story for Jeremy Melton, this is still a whodunit. Sure, it's an extremely obvious whodunit that doesn't really make any effort to sway your initial suspicions, but a whodunit nonetheless. Kate's boyfriend Adam Carr ends up being Jeremy Melton in disguise. Again, with the poster, David Boreanaz was one of the film's biggest stars. So he had prime placement in all of the advertising. So just by looking at the poster, my bet was on Angel himself being the killer. But then the movie makes no effort to try and dissuade you, constantly making Adam the only possible solution. I mean, who else is it going to be? The cop? The look of the killer is actually pretty sweet, with the heavy black pea coat doing a good job at hiding their identity. This helps with the little twist later when Adam puts Dorothy in the killer costume, and doesn't look drastically different despite having very different builds. The mask itself looks like an innocent doll, with blood trickling down from one nostril. It feels both unique and generic enough that it could easily be picked up by someone at a local costume shop. Unfortunately, there isn't any signature weapon, and the ones that he does use are rather tame. But the deaths end up being so simple that they feel like a disservice to such a badass looking killer. They're mostly just done so quickly, without much violence, that it makes me wonder how much the MPAA got involved. Even this heating iron death feels like it's going to be much more intense than it ends up being. Simple slashings and non-impactful arrows make for a lame slasher. It's honestly my biggest knock against the film, as it checks the other entertainment boxes. Just look at this great scene with Campbell walking into the basement to ignite the pilot light on the water heater. It's beautifully shot with some genuine tension, only for it to end with a simple axe to the back. It feels like such a waste of all that tension. Or even the Denise Richards death, which is on this awesome set and has a fun concept of the character being trapped inside this hot tub that has a clear lid. And the drilling, while silly, is at least a little different. Though, does this guy realize that he's making air holes for her? Regardless, they proceed to just abandon the drill and electrocute her instead. It amounts to very few of the deaths leaving any sort of impact.
Perv attack you?
Yeah, Jeremy attacked me. He attacked me.
Pervert jump buffalo!
I didn't know. Pervert.
If there's one part of Valentine that I want to take a closer look at, it's the opening scene that sets off the events of the entire film. The credit sequence shows an old yearbook with a ton of lovey-dovey writing all over it. They're able to establish the girls as well as how they look when they're older. They're also able to establish that this guy is obsessed with them. So it's a good intro, but the editing in this sequence is something else, with such rapid cuts and so many fade to blacks that I question how much of this was just the editor trying to punch up the scene in post. I promise we did not need all of these bells and whistles. But we get a nice little setup where all the girls we meet later on in the movie reject an ugly boy. I love how this kid just looks like a miniature Dwight Schrute. Ah, poor guy, he were just born in the wrong decade. In fact, the kid looks pretty normal outside of his teeth, so it's not even like we're getting an Elephant Man situation, despite the reactions of the kids making it seem that way. The casting in this whole scene is fantastic, with so many of the younger counterparts being dead ringers for their older versions. I mean, just look at this girl. She is the spitting image of Denise Richards. The little details really do matter. After being rejected by all of these girls, he's finally able to find one that will dance with him. Oh wait, she's full on making out with him. Never mind, good on you, Jeremy. His luck doesn't last long as some bullies try and recreate the scene from Carrie, only with fruit punch instead of blood. At least I assume that's what they're doing. It cracks me up how quickly this girl goes from macking on him to going, "Oh gross, no, get away." And the whole reason that I wanted to talk about this scene is that Jeremy ends up creating this whole elaborate plan to get back at these girls, even pinning the crime on Dorothy. Okay, fine, she publicly rejected him after she'd already accepted him, so he's likely to be mad about that. But what about these douchebags? They stripped the dude down to his underwear and beat him up, all in front of the rest of the school. Yet these guys go unpunished? It's the girls that deserve to be stalked and killed instead? I get that this is a slasher and the preferred victims tend to be female, but come on. If this guy is going to want to take vengeance out on anybody, it should be these assholes. Why not make these the boyfriends of the girls who are prodding them on? Anything to put the blame on the girls. It just, yeah, doesn't work and is kind of funny.
It's awfully late. You gonna be okay in here all alone?
Oh, yeah, I've got Chad, my corpse.
Oh.
Valentine released in the United States on February 2nd, 2001, and ended its worldwide run at over $36 million. Given its $29 million budget, it was just barely profitable, but with marketing costs, including a very expensive Super Bowl commercial, it wasn't the return on investment that Warner Brothers wanted. The film was absolutely despised, with only an 11% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The overall critics' consensus was that Valentine is basically a formulaic throwback to conventional pre-Scream slasher flicks. Critics say it doesn't offer enough suspense or scares to justify its addition to the genre. And despite thinking it deserves a little higher marks than that, I do agree with that assessment overall. There's a lot to like here, and this could have easily been one of the better slashers of the decade. But the MPAA absolutely cut this poor thing to pieces and gave us what could have easily just been a PG-13 slasher. But that's not what the filmmakers intended it for, so we have all of this setup but no punchline. It's rough. And while fans have been clamoring for an unrated version, the studio has shown exactly zero signs of interest. So the likelihood of that happening is about as likely as us getting a sequel. The cast has moved on to some big things, with David Boreanaz moving on from Angel to Bones. Katherine Heigl, of course, blew up due to Knocked Up and Grey's Anatomy, although her bad attitude relegated her to lesser fare. Jessica Capshaw, yes, that's Kate Capshaw's daughter, also had a Heigl connection, with the two both appearing on Grey's Anatomy. Marley Shelton continues to kick ass, appearing in 2022's Scream, as well as Taylor Sheridan's 1923. And Denise Richards is now on OnlyFans. So you just never do know where things will end up. Unfortunately, director Jamie Blanks, despite showing a lot of promise here, has been relegated to composing films versus directing them. But hey, at least he's still involved in the industry, and he should be proud of many elements of this film. I know it's gained a bit of a cult following over the years, and while I mostly view it as a movie with a ton of potential versus actually being good, I understand why so many people are drawn to it, because despite its boring kills, there are some really entertaining moments. And sometimes for a holiday slasher, that's all you need.